They say that reality evolves and revolves in cycles. And since learning and memory are part of reality, let's have a look at learning cycles and how they can boost the things we love to do, like learning languages, passing exams, understanding complex philosophy, and other goals like using memory and meditation for ego management, which is something I have to do all the time. And everything I do benefits from using a well-formed learning cycle. But where does this term and this idea of a learning cycle come from? Well, one major source is David Kolb. Kolb taught at Stanford University and wrote extensively on the topic of experiential learning. However, his research quickly found that merely having experiences was not enough to learn properly. You need reflective thinking. You need to be able to have some testing going on, and then ultimately you have to return to the beginning of the cycle. So he proposed 4 stages of learning that begin with concrete experience, which is not just any kind of experience, but literally concrete experience in his view. Then you have observation and reflection, and engaging in abstract thinking as you reflect on the previous 2 stages of the cycle, and then finally you test your ideas and conclusions. And Kolb called this approach a learning cycle because once you reach the final stage, you are supposed to return to the top. And this is the idea of the cycle. However, he changed this term. And in a chapter he co-wrote in Student Learning Abroad, Kolb said that the learning cycle is actually a learning spiral. So I think there's both a trap and an opportunity here because we're into learning and memory techniques. So we should be able to learn both those terms that Kolb used, right? We should be able to memorize learning cycle and learning spiral. If you'd like to be able to manage multiple terms for things, this is Dr. Anthony Metivier. This is the Magnetic Memory Method podcast. Hit that thumbs up if you've got one. Get subscribed if you're new here. If you love learning and being able to manage multiple terms and remember names like David Kolb and even the names of his articles using a simple technique that starts with the memory palace. Now let me share with you one of my favorite ways to construct a learning cycle. It's different than what Kolb describes, and one reason that I think my learning cycles are different is because I think of everything as being concrete. And I would start by trying to understand that the miracle of existence is being in the now. So one of the problems that we often have with learning cycles is that we're so focused on the outcome, the goal, that we're not really enjoying the process. So in order to help with that, I would suggest starting a learning cycle as an experiment, maybe an experiment that you repeat a couple of times in order to really get into it, is to write a vision statement about what it is you want to learn. Even if you're already in the process of learning something, taking some time to really go deep into the vision can help a great deal. Not only because it gives you more experience in the moment and a concrete experience of what you're doing and how you're going to do it, but it also can help you test whether you should be engaging in the learning cycle at all. So recently, I decided I was going to learn everything that I could about physics, and I designed a learning cycle for it. Physics is a tough topic in many ways. I don't have the prerequisite math for it, but I'm interested in it. So I wrote in my journal a process to try to figure out why. And what I did is I tried to figure out 5 levels of why. Now, in a way, this is kind of like starting with the final step of Kolb's cycle first. I'm testing the idea. And I really recommend that you do that. Test the idea and write out a vision statement with 5 reasons why. If you can't find 5 reasons why you want to engage in a learning cycle, then maybe there's a different learning cycle out there for you. Now, the next step is to have the concrete experience. And again, I think everything is concrete when you really dive into that experience of the now. I try to think of and find what are going to be the most important books on physics that I could read over the next 3 months? And then what in those books is going to take me into the next part of the learning cycle? So I started with 2 books at the same time using a process called interleaving. And in the first book that I really dove deep into, I was surprised to find Sir Roger Penrose obliviating all the worries that I had about prerequisite math. So in The Road to Reality, he says that he doesn't think that the math is nearly as difficult for people as they make it out to be. And so that's a very, very warming thing to feel, because I was almost talking myself out of it. And it's a very, very beautiful way that Penrose sets the learning journey for you. So that's one thing that you can always anticipate, is that when you get into a learning cycle, you're going to find that you have lots of objections in your mind. But often the people who are the best equipped, or at least very, very qualified to take you through the learning cycle, they're going to help you destroy those objections. And of course, we can remember Feynman in one of his lectures saying that his number one job was to not discourage people from learning physics, because a lot of his students told him, I don't understand a thing that you're talking about. And Feynman said, don't worry about it. I don't understand what I'm talking about either. It's not that physics or anything that you want to study is ever completely understood by anyone. Rather, the people who are having the most concrete experience of all are the ones who are going in with the willingness to let go of certainty, to let go of completeness. Rather, they are engaging it knowing that it's always going to be incomplete. So having that vision in mind and really making it concrete for yourself can help you let go of that uncertainty, even though at the same time you're trying to craft a very, very certain path. So in your vision statement, 5 reasons why, and then start getting into the books, doing a bit of research, showing yourself who might be the most qualified people to read, and then really reading them. If Sir Roger Penrose says that the math isn't that difficult, then maybe it isn't. And, I don't know if I find it as easy as he says, but nonetheless, it's very heartening to keep moving forward. Now, let's go a little deeper into gathering the best possible materials for your experience. When you research, you can't just rely on the teachers. You can't just rely on the authors. But mostly our teachers are not necessarily experts on the topics that we want to learn. So what we want to do is get into the internet. And one little tip that I can give you is search the internet in the most sophisticated ways possible. So it's a whole discussion on how to, use a search engine. Gwern has amazing material on that you can check out. One thing I like to do is always search for syllabi. So one thing I'll do is put in syllabus, physics, textbook, and what that's going to help do is find what is on the reading lists at the top universities. So I'm looking for Oxford, I'm looking for Princeton, that sort of level of university, and then go into the books that are mentioned the most often in my search, start reading them, and then read the books that are recommended in those books. So Road to Reality by Sir Roger Penrose has lots and lots of reference books, and just pick a small percentage of those to supplement the reading in the core textbook. The next step in a learning cycle I recommend is to take notes in a sophisticated manner. Do you know the opposite of a learning cycle or learning spiral? I call it a learning nightmare. That's a situation where even if you've identified the best possible learning materials, you wind up completely scattered. Even if you've identified the best main points in the books, you can't even remember the title or the author of the books, which is very disheartening. So I suggest that you not only take notes really, really well, but take them in a way that's optimized for using the memory palace technique. And the cool thing about using index cards to take notes as opposed to locking your notes in a linear notebook is that you can move index cards around. And if you want to, you can photograph them and put them into spaced repetition software, which gives you a much quicker learning cycle and one that gets your hand involved, because having your hand involved in taking notes allows you to get haptic memory benefits. And Lynn Kelly, one of our best memory experts, she has called the hand the ultimate encryption device for getting more information into your memory more quickly, more efficiently, more effectively. And it really just comes down to being able to write out your notes, ideally on flashcards or index cards so you can move them around and match them with memory palaces. If you'd like to learn more about how to use a memory palace, make sure to go to magneticmemorymethod.com, sign up for the free course there, or just get into the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass. It will help you do this. And then ultimately, you'll be able to memorize in real time without using your hands or flashcards at all. However, as part of my learning cycles, I always test my memory by writing out what it was that I memorized, and that helps it get into long-term memory so much faster. And it's really, really important, that self-testing part of a learning cycle. So let's talk a little bit more about using memory techniques and testing. Memory techniques, why use them? Well, they're a major alternative to rote learning. What is rote learning? It's just repeating the same thing over and over and over again without some sort of creative component, what we sometimes call active recall. Active recall personalizes the information, it uses a lot of variety, and you're never just repeating the information through exposure, but you're actually engaging with it. You're entangling with it. When I use my mind without flashcards, I also use colors, sounds, associations, and so forth. And then whenever repetition takes place, it's creative repetition. So it's almost like having a vision statement for each and every piece of information, but in this case, it's using what scientists call elaborative encoding. So beautiful, beautiful. And then when it comes to testing and you're making that information come out of your mind through your hand, you're engaging with it in such a deep and rich multi-sensory way. The memories form more quickly and more completely. And you get that benefit of everything being, not just feeling like, but actually being a concrete experience, because you're getting stuck into the experience at each and every level. So I really absolutely love to have my learning cycles optimized in this way. And, it makes it so much more fun and easier to be consistent. Now, the next level that we have is observation and reflection. So there's many ways to observe what's going on and reflect. Keeping a memory journal is a big one. We had on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast Johannes Malo to talk about how he, as one of the most impressive memory competitors out there, uses journaling as part of his learning cycle to get better and better at memory competition. The whole idea being is that when you write out the details, you're able to see them in a concrete way, but an objective way, and you can think more reflectively about how you're going to improve. Now, a key thing here is to actively choose not to punish yourself when you make mistakes or when you're doing less well than you would like to, but literally be objective about the details. And one thing that you want to do is, as Kolb suggested, be abstract about it. So what does it mean to have abstract thinking as you reflect about your observations? Well, it is taking your emotions out of it. And one way to do that is just use little personal mantras. So you can say, the numbers, it's just a game. And that's the next step, is to engage in observation, but in an abstract way without emotions. When you take emotions out of things and you just look at the raw data, you can say, okay, I made a mistake memorizing, say, the first 20 digits of pi, or you made a mistake with a declension table in a language that you're learning. And then you can, without judging yourself, say, what am I going to do to improve this or make it work better? And then you can go into the final step of a learning cycle and test your conclusions. But it's very, very difficult to have anything to test if you get emotional about things. So one thing that you can do in order to help yourself not get emotional is use little personal mantras. So one that I always like to do is numbers on a screen, or it's just a game. And these little mantras, they're very simple, I know, but when I think of myself getting emotional over numbers on a screen, the best thing that I can do to combat that, to be abstract about it, is just to say, numbers on a screen. And it makes me laugh that I would ever have an emotional reaction to just data, right? So then look at the data and think, okay, so what are we going to do either to improve or just to keep going? Because sometimes that's what you need to do, is just keep going and leave the idea of improving aside. In fact, letting go of the idea of improving is itself one of those raw, concrete experiences that lets you move forward in many, many cases. But there's a little bit of know thyself to all of this, and you have to figure out what is it that helps you keep moving forward. So I find that I get really, really frustrated by numbers on a screen, and then when I just have that little mantra, numbers on a screen, well, it's an abstract attitude that helps me just get into, okay, so what am I going to do better, or just to keep myself keep on keeping on, and then I figure it out, and then I have a new test to run, and then the learning cycle goes over and over and over again as I create new data to have objective ideas about and abstract, emotionless analysis of, and then formulate a new test and start all over again. And you're going to have a lot of randomness in life this way, but the more randomness you have, the more you can practice having an abstract attitude about it. And ultimately, you're going to have lots of gaps that you notice, and you're going to think of ways to fill them in. And that's the adventure. So having a learning cycle like that puts you in the driver's seat, and you learn how to teach yourself. You also become more compassionate and patient with the other people out there in the world, because you realize that that's what they're doing whether they realize it or not. But you have a learning cycle that you can reflect upon, and you can use that to remember that you are only human too. And you can remember that your teachers are also only human too, and you continue to keep moving forward. And I would suggest that you remember one of the many creeds of the magnetic memory method. The more you learn, the more you can learn, especially when you spend more time on thinking about all experience as concrete, and then observing, reflecting, coming up with more tests in a spirit of abundance. That really working on your memory is one of the only things that can really provide you with that openness. And the reason why is that when we work on our memory, we improve our working memory, which is literally the space in our minds that we have to deal with multiple data points at the same time. And I think that's probably why many of us get really, really frustrated, is because we haven't worked on expanding our working memory. So if you would like more information on how to do that, I would suggest making sure you're subscribed. Hit that thumbs up if you haven't already, in an experience of abundance that only a truly magnetic memory can provide. Now, I undergo learning cycles all the time, so if you'd like to see one of my recent ones, I have tried using ChatGPT as part of a language learning cycle. And one of the things that I discovered there, well, I found out some things that I totally anticipated and predicted, but there was an interesting way of using what some language learners call laddering that actually worked pretty good. So I show some of the pitfalls that you can avoid in language learning and how to use laddering, which is, I think, one of the best use cases for ChatGPT. But I wouldn't have discovered it if I didn't use a learning cycle in precisely the way that we've talked about today. So go ahead and check out that video on ChatGPT for language learning next.